Welcome to the Seekers Forum podcast series. I'm Mark Matousek. I spoke to Seymour Bernstein, who is the subject of a new documentary by the actor Ethan Hawke called Seymour: An Introduction, about his long career as a mentor, teacher, and musical prodigy. Seymour is now 88 years old, and he's a font of artistic passion and wisdom, whose philosophy of teaching and music may be summed up in a single sentence. He says the real essence of who we are resides in our talent, whatever that is. By talent, he doesn't necessarily mean artistic talent. Our talent is the passion, the genius, the originality that we bring to our lives. And that's why I wanted to speak to him this month when we're talking so much about the negativity bias and this voice in us that tells us that life is impossible, that we can't do it, that we are not equal to what is given to us in our own existence. Seymour is the author of 2 previous books, With Your Own Hands, as well as 20 lessons in keyboard choreography. And his most recent book is called Play Life More Beautifully, which is co-authored with the spiritual scholar and activist Andrew Harvey. As eagle-eyed as he is eloquent, Seymour spoke to me about how to locate our essential talent, why life without discipline leads nowhere, and why he doesn't believe in God. Welcome, Seymour Bernstein. It's so great to have you here. I want to talk to you about Playing Life More Beautifully, which is your new book with Andrew Harvey.
Yes.
And it also seems to be your mantra in life, learning to play more beautifully. And I'd like to start with one quote that I was so moved by. You said, "I remember I became aware when practice went well, everything in life seemed harmonized. When it didn't, I was out of sorts." And then you said, "The real essence of who we are resides in our talent, whatever that talent is." Can you talk about the importance of discovering that talent, whether or not we're musicians?
Well, I believe that everybody has, and let's replace the word talent with some sort of passion or some deep interest in something. It occurs to me that essence, that deep interest, that passion, is the essence of who that person is. In short, we're all searching for our identity. Some people have an identity crisis, as you know. And I think that when we decide and determine who we really are, what is the real essence that determines our personality, our desires, our aspirations, we will find that in whatever talent we have.
And that talent doesn't need to be artistic, obviously. It can be a talent for mothering, or it can be a talent for, being a community organizer. Is that right?
Exactly what you said. It could be gardening. It could be cooking. As long as you have a passion for something. The reason why I speak about that very often with my friends and with my pupils is because from the moment we're born, we're dependent on forces outside of us. For example, if we didn't have a mother, we wouldn't be able to survive. And as we get older, if we didn't have teachers, we wouldn't learn how to write or to read, etc. Throughout our lives, we seek gurus, teachers, forces that help us to improve ourselves. We're seeking all the time outside of ourselves. And in a religious sense, we also seek something, a spirit that is apart from us. I maintain, and it is only my thought, that all life forces have within themselves a spiritual reservoir. As a matter of fact, many religions do claim that God is within. So there is something within all of us that can give us many answers if we tap into it. And when we're thinking that our talent may actually define who we are, then we are probing something within us and not seeking for answers all the time outside of us.
That's so beautifully said. And yet, teachers, I mean, you're one of the great teachers. Teachers and mentors play an important part in discovering and cultivating that talent sometimes.
Well, we couldn't do it without our teachers, isn't that right? But Mark, when you think of the word education, you know it comes from the Latin educare, which means to lead out. So, in a sense, the best teachers are aware of that special essence within their pupil that needs to be let out. And that's what good teaching really does. It doesn't implant anything, but rather leads it out of the student. Many of my pupils, for example, when I'm teaching them music and I show them a certain interpretive attitude, they all say the same thing. You know, that's right. I feel exactly the same thing. I just made them aware of what it is that I just said, that essence is within them, and I let it out of them.
You mirror it back to them.
In a sense, that's a wonderful way to put it.
Something that you say about music teachers also struck me. You say the most important thing that music teachers can do for their pupils is to inspire and encourage an emotional response, not just for music, but more importantly for all aspects of life.
Exactly.
Can you talk to me about how does music sensitize emotion and prepare us for life?
Well, music, see, no one really knows what music is. Scientists, philosophers, musicologists, they've all put their heads together to try to define this amazing language. And there is nothing really succinct about that definition. But in my opinion, it's fair to say that music is a language of feeling. And somehow, the great composers, by placing tones one after the other in a certain order, vertically and horizontally, those tones define all human emotion.
And by becoming sensitive to music, we become sensitive to those emotions.
Exactly. The music ought to stir up the very emotion that is within the music, whatever the student is practicing. That music should stir up the same emotion that is within the music. And that's why I said the most important thing that teachers can do for their pupil is to encourage this emotional response. Make them aware that the music is triggering a specific feeling within them. As I go through life, and it's been many years, you know, in April 24th, I'm going to be 89. So,
wow.
What?
I said wow.
Oh, you said wow. Okay. So that's living a long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I notice that all too many people that I meet, I would call them emotionally bankrupt. They don't seem to respond emotionally to certain situations and stimuli. Certainly you can't be a serious music student unless your emotional world is alive. So That's why the ancient Greeks knew this, and that's why music was one of 4 subjects without which they thought that humans could not develop properly.
Mm-hmm. And one way that music teaches us to understand our lives has to do with dissonance and resolution. If I can just read one more thing that you say we wouldn't know the meaning of the resolution without the dissonance.
There you go.
Can you apply that to resilience and how we approach failure and risk in our lives?
Well, Mark, you're really terrific. I have to interrupt the interview by throwing the light on you. You're very perceptive. That's exactly right, what you just said. In life, we have conquests and disappointments, and they're all part of our development. Sometimes it's more difficult to weather huge success, And of course, we all know what a pain it is to suffer rejection, but gains can also create problems. I'll give you an example. When I made my New York debut in Town Hall, I was in my 20s, and there were about 6 newspapers that came out at that time, and they all had rave reviews. Well, Mark, I want to tell you that 3 years later, when I wanted to give a second concert, I suffered nervousness because I thought, how am I going to top that first debut? What will happen if the reviews weren't as good? And so that's how life goes. It goes positive, negative, tension, relaxation, etc. And we have to weather both.
Absolutely. That's so interesting to think that success can breed its own kind of anxiety that can sometimes be more counterproductive than failure. It sets us back, where failure pushes us forward.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly what you said. And when you make a huge success, then you say, well, now, how can I climb higher than that? The famous pianist Vladimir Horowitz, he was declared the greatest pianist in the world. Every time he walked out on the stage, he found it almost impossible to play that role of being the greatest alive. And finally it broke him down. He had to retire for 12 years and take stock of what was going on. And he survived. And he survived very nobly and ended up playing just better than he had ever played.
Seymour, I'd like to ask you about discipline. Discipline is a word that lots of folks have trouble with. You say, without craft, there can be no artistry. How can we reframe our relationship to discipline so that it becomes something that comes out of love rather than self-punishment?
Well, maybe it's something even more than love. Discipline is more than love. Again, quite recently, I came to the conclusion that all of life is a preparation for getting older. I came to that conclusion because of my age. So at my age, I look back and I take stock of my life. And I say to myself, now, did you give life the best fight you knew how? Did you really practice as hard as you could? Did you accept challenges and try your best to meet them, and etc.? And do you have any regrets? Well, I'm one of these fortunate people, so I don't have any regrets. and I really did give life the best fight I knew how. And I impregnate this into my pupils, you know. I tell them, if they're lax in practicing for their lessons, I'm very quick to tell them, now you just take stock now. You know, you should be thinking about getting old or anything like that, but try to project into the future, and you're my age or even a little younger, and you're going to take stock. Did I do the best that I could? And you don't want to have any regrets. So I think that you ought to just realize what the future holds for you and do the best job that you know how.
Beautiful. I'd like to talk to you about the integration of the artist and the world. I mean, you've had such a refined life in a certain kind of way. You say in the film that the contrast between the unbelievable attainment of art and the unpredictability of the social world is so great that it can make an artist neurotic. The contrast can make an artist neurotic.
Yes.
How does the artist integrate that refinement and that sensitivity with being in the world?
Well, artists have a difficult time. They have a difficult time because they don't understand what being an artist entails. They're doing it for the wrong reasons. Of course, all serious artists begin by devoting their lives to a passion because they love it. I know that, for example, I couldn't live without music. Music isn't actually a way of life for me. It is my life. Music is my life. So now, when I practice, what I'm doing is I'm integrating my emotional, my intellectual, and my physical worlds. Now, if artists knew that they were doing that, and if they were conscious of it, when they achieved an integration of those three areas through their art, they would direct that integration into their social world. As an example, when musicians train themselves to listen to what's coming out of their instrument so that they're sure that what is coming out of the instrument matches what their inner world is experiencing, that teaches them to listen to people speaking in a very intense and involved fashion. You see, there's a correlation there. So I think that artists get into trouble and they get neurotic because they don't carry their hard-earned discipline from their art into the social world. In fact, they try to do just the opposite. They try only to bring the social world into their art. And I don't really think that works because the social world is very unpredictable. But our art is very predictable.
And that's what gives it depth. Is that right? The fact that
exactly.
we have this...
That's what gives the art depth and yields depth to the person.
You talk about the innocence of children, that we can learn from the innocence of children, which reminded me of the biblical line of, the child shall become father to the man. What is it that we can learn from the child within ourselves, Seymour, that we're trained to forget as adults?
Yes, absolutely what you said.
What are the childlike qualities that can benefit us in our grown lives.
Spontaneity without thought. That's the major thing. You know, children respond without thought. They're not even aware of their response. They just exude a particular response to stimuli and events. You know, a child will walk into a room that is unusually decorated and say, "Oh, Mommy, look at that. Isn't this gorgeous?" And sometimes the mother will say, "Now behave yourself." You know, some parents, some grown-ups don't like to have people express themselves. They think there's something a little rude about that. And I know in some cases that's a religious no-no to be over-emotional about anything other than God. So you see, this is a very complicated area.
It is. The word enthusiasm comes from the Greek for filled with God, so it's sort of ironic.
Well, there you go. It's very difficult,
isn't
it?
Suppressed enthusiasm.
By the way, do you know that I don't believe in God?
So tell me about that.
Oh boy, do I want to tell you about that. Well, you know, this is so interesting because when I met, when there was a discussion about writing the book with Andrew, I got very concerned because, you know, this is a very religious press. And I discovered that that's Ethan Hawke. I discovered that Andrew felt exactly as I did. This is how we feel. If I might try to, it's difficult to put into words, but I'm going to try. You see, when I contemplate the life force itself, all the various life forms that's on Earth and in space, and when I contemplate a universe that is still expanding, and no one has ever contemplated or found the end to it. It's still expanding. I just that in itself, those two things, I have to fall on my knees in awe and reverence. I say to myself, something is responsible for this. Now, can I conclude what or who is responsible for all of this? The first thing that comes to mind is that to name it is sheer arrogance. It can't have a name. It's so awe-inspiring, so spiritual, so amazing, so everything that will trigger a sense of awe. So for me, it can't be named. So the closest that I've ever come to naming it is to just consider that in all life forces, there is a spiritual reservoir. In other words, the universe, which is the macrocosm, is within us in the form of a microcosm, which I call the spiritual reservoir. And Andrew feels very much the same. I was so interested to know that he felt that way.
It reminds me of something that you say in the movie. You say, I never dreamt that with my own two hands I could touch the sky.
Oh, boy. Yes.
How beautiful is that? And it connects to what you were just saying.
Well, you know where that comes from? Well, Mark, this is a very, very dramatic story. One of my dearest friends who passed away some years ago was Flora Levin. She was a famous classicist, and her expertise was ancient Greek music. And she's written books, and she's been noted in books by other classicists. She was a very famous woman, and she was my pupil. So you can imagine her expertise was ancient Greek music. So I learned a lot from her. And as a matter of fact, she was the one who really taught me how to write. Well, she helped me write my book, With Your Own Two Hands. That's the name of it. And I was teaching one day, and she interrupted my teaching with a phone call. And she said, Did I ever call you when you were teaching? I said, no. She said, well, your book is in the printer. It's about to be printed. You have to call your editor of Macmillan and tell them to stop the printing immediately. I said, Flora, what are you talking about? She said, Seymour, there's no time to waste. Just do what I say. Well, she was so urgent, I stopped teaching. I called the editor, and they stopped the press. Then I spoke with Flora on the phone later, and this is what she told me. She said, do you know who Sappho was? She was a woman poet, and she was probably one of the greatest poets that ever lived. And there are very few poems extant from her. And in my research, I just translated one of her poems for the first time. And here's the translation. I never dreamt that with my own two hands I could touch the sky. Well, my book is named, the title is With Your Own Two Hands. So when she saw that, she almost fainted. She couldn't believe this. Oh, I burst into tears, when she told me this. And they stopped the press, and on the front piece of my book, the first page, that Sappho poem appears.
Perfect.
And Ethan read everything that I ever wrote, and how he discovered that page is just amazing to me. Can you picture? I'm watching the movie in a private showing that Ethan arranged, and at the end of the movie, I speak that poem. Can you picture how I felt? I would just burst into tears.
It's extraordinary. And it's a wonderful movie. I mean, so congratulations on the movie itself. It's going to help so many people and inspire so many people.
Don't you think Ethan created a masterpiece?
I think it's a beautiful, beautiful movie. Well, I think you're the masterpiece. I think it's a really good movie.
Well, I know it's about me, but the editing of a movie like that, I mean, everything depends upon that. He edited it in a certain way so that the piano becomes a metaphor for life.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, Seymour, I don't want to keep you. I know that you have another call after mine, but I thank you so much for talking to me, and I really hope to meet you in person sometime.
Mark, I have to congratulate you. You are really terrific.
Thank you so much, sir. I'll talk to you again.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.